Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of February. I ended up reading a total of 10 books this past month. I read books across 3 genres. I read 5 romance books, 4 fantasy, and 1 memoir, which I did listen to on audiobook. And for my ratings, they ranged from 3.5 stars all the way up to 4.5 stars. So I would say it was a pretty decent reading month. I'm going to try to do this in chronological order, in the order that I read the books. So we're going to start with the very first book that I read this month, which was Beg, Borrow, or Steal by Sarah Adams. This is part of the interconnected standalone series that goes along with When in Rome and I want to say Practice Makes Perfect is the other one. I actually haven't read either of those, so this is my very first introduction into Sarah Adams' writing. This book follows Emily and Jack. They're both elementary school teachers in Rome, Kentucky, which is just a very small, tight-knit town, and they are each other's arch nemesis. They've been kind of going back and forth at each other since college, and just when Emily thinks he is finally moving away to get married, he actually calls off his engagement and moves back to her town as her next-door neighbor. They kind of team up when Emily accidentally sends a manuscript of her spicy romance novel to her school's principal instead of a publisher, and she needs Jack's help to get the manuscript back from the principal before he reads it. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed reading this. It was super fun, and Emily was a very complex character, which I wasn't expecting. In the past couple months, I've definitely been focusing more on fantasy, so it was fun to read kind of just a light and comical romance. The enemies to lovers in this was definitely different, considering I've been reading so much fantasy that they're not really enemies the way that they are in fantasy books when they're actually in warring kingdoms, but they definitely don't like each other, which I like how it kind of all came together at the end. Jack Bennett, some of the quotes in this book, I actually started writing them down in my notes app as I was reading this because some of these quotes are just too good. I'm going to read you some. These are definitely out of context, and I'll choose ones that aren't too spoilery, but they're just too good not to share. So this first one, kind of for some context, they get in an argument and she asks him to leave her alone, and he says, "Do you actually want to be alone, or are you just uncomfortable with someone seeing you in a moment of vulnerability?" Huh? Like, I did not need to be called out like that. That one struck a chord with me, and it was not okay. And one more, just because the quotes in this are actually too good. He says, "And to think you consider yourself hard to love, loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done." Jack Bennett, the man that you are. Like, I love Jack Bennett. He's definitely up there in my book boyfriends at this point because everything he said was just so, it just had so much intent behind it, and he was just so cute and sweet. I love him, love this book. Definitely gonna pick up more Sarah Adams books in the future. The next book that I picked up is Lightlark by Alex Astor. This is a book about the island of Lightlark, which appears every 100 years to host a deadly game where 6 kingdom rulers all come together to try and end their curses that were cast upon them when they broke apart the world, I guess. You're following the main character Isla, who is the only powerless ruler through her point of view of the games. You get the love triangle between her and 2 of the other kingdom rulers, and kind of just her strategy on how she plans to win the game and end the curse for her realm. There is a lot of good aspects about this book. I feel like it was definitely fun to read, and I had a good time. I'm personally not a big fan of love triangles, so that was a little bit rough and off-putting for me, but it is entertaining. It's not revolutionary by any means. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. The ending is really what did it for me. I did not see that coming by any means, and there's a lot of betrayal and lying in this book, which I thought was fun. It kind of keeps the mystery aspect going. I would recommend this if you're looking for like a fun fantasy, but I definitely don't think it's my favorite. I am going to try and read the next book, Nightbane, which I do have, and after I finish that, I might decide to continue the series. I'm not absolutely convinced at the moment, so if you absolutely love this series, convince me in the comments if I should read Nightbane and continue the rest of the series. I know Nightbane and Skyshade are the books that are out right now, but apparently There's 1 or 2 more books coming in the near future, so I'm not sure if I'm gonna get to those. The third book that I read in February was The Love of My Afterlife by Christy Greenwood. First of all, can we just appreciate this cover? I feel like it's so cute and the colors are just adorable to me, and the spine, oh, it just looks so good on my shelf. I honestly loved this book, had a great time. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. This book follows the main character, Delphi, who actually dies on the first page. She literally dies on the very first page. But after she dies, she goes to this place called Evermore, and there she's kind of in this waiting room where she runs into a man named Jonah. He is not actually dead. He is just kind of under anesthesia, I guess, and he gets sent back to Earth, and Delphi is there with M, who is kind of the receptionist, I guess. And M strikes a deal with her that if she can find Jonah and make him kiss her within 10 days, Delphi can go back to Earth and live her life on Earth. So So this book follows the main character, Delphi. She actually dies on the very first page. I think the first line of the book is, "This cannot be how I die. It really, really can't." So she dies basically on the very first page, and while she's in the afterlife waiting room, she runs into a man who the receptionist thinks is her soulmate. His name is Jonah. So after he leaves, because he's just under anesthesia, so he's actually not dead, the receptionist, M, or Merritt, strikes a deal with Delphi that if she can find Jonah back on Earth within 10 days and get him to kiss her, Delphi can live and go back to her life on Earth. So that's kind of what you're following throughout the entire book. It's just her trying to track down Jonah. She doesn't have anything more than his first name. And you kind of find out more about her life. She doesn't really have any close friends or family. She's kind of a loner. There's a lot of heartwarming things in this book, I would say. There's definitely a found family aspect. And the romance aspect was actually not what I was expecting, which I definitely liked, that this wasn't super duper predictable, just kind of different than every other romance book I've read. And I did really like that magical realism element of her being dead, technically, and the character from the Afterlife, Merritt, contacts her through text or just like popping up, and it's funny. I don't know. The whole thing is kind of just funny. It was definitely a light, It was a fun, light-hearted read, and I would definitely recommend this to anybody who's looking for kind of just a palate cleanser romance. The next book that I read, I actually read on my Kindle through the Libby app, which was Mad About You by Mari McFarlane. This book follows the main character, Harriet. She is a wedding photographer, and she has this boyfriend who I guess, I don't know, from the beginning to me, it felt like she never even really liked him. So that's kind of the vibe you get straight off the bat, and he proposes to her in front of his entire family, so under pressure she says yes, and later on that night she ends up breaking off their engagement, and she has to move out of his house, and she moves in with a stranger whose ad she found online. That's kind of the gist of the whole thing. I feel like if I explain more of the plot, it'll give a little bit too much away. I absolutely loved this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. From what I've seen on Goodreads reviews, people tend to agree that Mari McFarlane's books are never really about the romance and more about the characters, and I will definitely agree with that having read this book. I feel like the romance definitely took on like a back burner plot kind of position, but the main focus was on character development and just the characters of the story. Very, very character-driven book. Usually, if I know it's a romance, I'm kind of waiting for the romance and rooting for it to happen, but in this case, I actually really appreciated the fact that it was character-driven. I feel like I learned a lot about a lot of different topics. This book was definitely triggering I can see how it would be triggering for some people. I would recommend you look up the trigger warnings before you read this book. With that being said, if you have read the trigger warnings and you decide that you still want to continue on with this book, I would 1000% recommend it. just the way that the entire kind of plot comes to a climax was so interesting to me. I don't think I've ever read anything similar to this. I had a great time reading this. I'm pretty sure I read this in less than 24 hours, which also might be because it's on the Kindle. I don't know, Kindles make you read faster. It's true. I actually probably will be recommending this book to anyone and everyone who will listen to me. Quick intermission. If you do want to keep up with me and what I'm reading, my ratings, my reviews, all of that stuff, I am on Fable and Goodreads. I recently discovered Fable just this past couple months, and I absolutely love this app. There's just something about the way that it works, the way that it looks. You can create a widget on your phone to track how many days in a row you read, which, I don't know, I feel like everything about this is just so fun. I'm pretty sure they have another subsection of this where you can track shows that you watch and movies, which is also super cool. But yeah, if you do want to keep up with me on Fable and Goodreads, I'll have those linked down below in the description. I decided that I wanted to read the Six of Crows duology finally. I've had it on my shelf for literally a year and a half at this point. And I searched it on TikTok first, and everybody said that I should read the very first 3 books in the Grishaverse universe first, which would be the Shadow and Bone trilogy. So I went to my local library, which is why I don't have the very first book on me right now, but I read the first book, Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I really can only tell you about the first book in the trilogy because I feel like if I go too far into the second and third books, it gives away too much, so I'll kind of just explain the plot line from the first book without giving you any spoilers, of course. This book follows Alina Starkov, who is the main character of the book, and she lives in the kingdom of Ravka. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that, do not ask me. But in this world, there are 2 types of people, I guess you could say. There are the Grisha, who have magical type powers, and just regular people. Alina is just a normal person. She is an orphan. She grew up in an orphanage with her best friend Mal, and it is eventually discovered while she is fighting in the war that she has sun summoning Grisha power, which has never been heard of before. The Darkling, who is the opposite of Alina in the aspect that he can summon shadows, brings her back to Osalta, which is the capital of the kingdom, and is trying to figure out how he can work together with her to destroy the Fold, which is just I don't even know how to describe it, a section of darkness in the world that it's a section of darkness within the country that when you pass through it, most people die because of the Volcra, which are evil creatures that live in there. There's a whole, this plot is like a little bit too confusing for me to even explain this in words. Anyways, the entire book is focused on Alina and the Darkling working together to destroy the Fold, which would be great for everybody, basically. I really can't say much more after that without kind of ruining the first ending of the first book and honestly the rest of the trilogy. So that's all I'm going to say on that. The first book I did give 3.5 stars. This is a YA fantasy, so there's not a lot of romance within these 3 books, which is fine, but I was honestly hoping there would be a little bit more, or at least like some pulling of the heartstrings. I'm not exactly sure. We'll get to that in a second. After finishing Shadow and Bone, I went straight into the second book in the trilogy, which is Siege and Storm. This one I gave 4 stars. This one is definitely where the plot began to pick up a little more. And I want to say that this is the longest of the 3 books. I flew straight through this. I was eating up literally every word. I was just really wondering where or when the plot would like end for this book, because once I got closer to the end, I understood what I thought was going to happen wasn't going to happen. So I was very interested to see how she would wrap all of this up. I actually really did like the additional characters that we got in this book. I feel like they added a lot to the story and kind of just gave it more of a group feeling that you're kind of rooting for. In the first book, you kind of really feel like you're just following Alina, but in this book, you get so many more characters, and I don't know, I really loved the side characters in this book. I'm not sure if this is a series that I would ever come back to and reread. It's not one that I feel like is going to stick with me for a long time, but everybody did say to read this to get an understanding of the universe, which I feel like these books definitely really set up the magic system for, hopefully, for Six of Crows. The next book is actually an audiobook. I listened to this through Spotify, and it is The House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie. If you don't know what this is about, I honestly don't know how you don't know what this is about. It is about the 8 Passengers YouTube channel. They had over 1 million subscribers. I personally watched them a lot throughout my teenage years, and I absolutely loved watching their channel. This book is actually a memoir from the oldest daughter's point of view. Her mom, Ruby Frankie, and her mom's friend, therapist, confidant, business partner, Jody Hildebrandt, were both sentenced to prison time. There is a lot of abuse and honestly a lot of sad, awful things that happened to these 4 children that she touches on in this book. I personally wanted to listen to it because I had watched the channel for so many years, and I had obviously kept up with what had been going on through social media, but it was definitely interesting to hear this from Sherry's point of view, and the audiobook is actually narrated by her, which I feel like added a lot of emotion to the story. I'm personally not going to be rating this book because I feel like it's wrong to rate somebody else's trauma. That just feels horrible to do, but I would definitely recommend listening to this. I also just watched the Hulu documentary that they did on Ruby, and I don't know. I feel like it's a good watch if you have been invested in what has been going on so far, or if you're interested in just like hearing the story. It's like a true crime story. All I can say is that I hope Ruby gets her full 30 years sentence. Then I read arguably my most exciting book of the month, which was an advanced copy of The Love Haters by Catherine Center. I already posted an in-depth review on my TikTok, so I'm not going to try and beat a dead horse here by talking about it even more, but I did absolutely love this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I would recommend every single one of Catherine Center's books. She knows what she's doing and she does it flawlessly every single time. I love her and I will read everything that she writes, whether it's a grocery list or a book. I do not care. If she writes it, I'm reading it. If you're going on vacation this summer, if you're sitting by a pool this summer, if you are looking for summer vibes in any capacity, I would 1 million trillion gazillion % recommend this book. I feel like everybody should read this summer. It was super fun, cute, honestly had me tearing up at some points too, which I will say is really what solidifies a book being a good book for me. But overall, I loved it. I would recommend this to everybody. Then I ended up finishing the Shadow and Bone trilogy with the last book, Ruin and Rising. Again, I can't really say too much about what happens in this book without spoiling almost the entire trilogy for you. I can't decide between 4 and 4.5 stars for this book, so I might just meeting myself in the middle at 4.25 stars. I don't know. I was expecting more from the conclusion of this series. I'm not exactly loving how she chose to end the series. I understand that it's a YA fantasy novel, so I could have seen this coming. But just the way that it ends, I feel like we could have solved that same problem 2 books ago, and it took another, 800 pages to get to an ending that we could have gotten in the very first book. I don't know, the ending really threw me off, but I did enjoy reading the book. The entire first, I would say 80% of this book, I was enthralled. I was really wondering where we were going to go and how it was going to end. There was a lot of battle scenes, fighting, teamwork, which I definitely really enjoyed, which is why I'm giving this book such a high rating at 4.25 stars. Just gets points off for the ending, which I didn't really love. I'm hoping that everyone was right in recommending me to read this before the Six of Crows duology. Now that I have an understanding of the magic system and how the world works, hopefully that gives me just some well-needed background knowledge for Six of Crows. I will let you know. That is actually on my March TBR. I'm hoping to get to that this month. So I will let you know whether or not this is worth it, in my opinion, to read before Six of Crows. The last book that I ended up picking up in February was Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. This was actually my very first time reading a book by this author, and I definitely really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. This book follows the main characters Win and Bo, who have a one-night stand and accidentally conceive. The unplanned pregnancy trope really isn't my thing, but she did it super duper well. Both of the characters have a physical disability, which I feel like definitely adds a lot to the story. You kind of see how they struggle through that and how that affects them through parenthood and just their regular day-to-day lives. The male main character in this book, Bo, oh my good lord. This man, he knows what he's doing. Literally everything that he was doing was exactly what he should be doing. I loved that not one aspect of this man made me think, she could do better than that. No. He's the blueprint. This man is the literal blueprint. She needed something, he got it. She needed something and she didn't even ask for it. He knew and he got it. Acts of service king. This is the acts of service king. There were actually 2 quotes in this book that I also had to write down as I was reading it, so maybe I will share those if they're not too spoilery. Let's see. This next quote, I feel like it doesn't even need explaining. Even out of context, this just applies to literally everyone. She says, "I look away, feeling far too perceived for my liking, and yet a piece of me is grateful for it. It's so much easier to communicate insecurities when you don't need to communicate them at all. Isn't that all we ever want? To be seen and heard, validated, even when we're not able to ask for it." Like, yes, actually, how did you know that? How did you know that? Anyways, quotes aside, this book was amazing, to say the least. I will definitely be picking up more Hannah Bonham Young books. I think, maybe I don't know. I'm pretty sure that she came out with another book recently, at least in the past couple of months, so I'm gonna try and pick that one up next. Highly recommend this book and this author. So that concludes all of the books that I read in the month of February. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will hopefully be back next month with another video of all the books that I read in March. We'll see what I'm able to get into this month. Anyways, if you want, you can keep up with me in other corners of the internet. I'll have all of my links in the description below. And that's all. See you next time.